The rocky cliffs of Valdris Island scraped against Sera's bleeding palms as the villagers dragged her toward the churning sea below. "Half-blood witch!" They spat, their faces twisted with disgust and fear. "Your demon father's blood has poisoned our crops for the last time." What they didn't know was that Sera's father wasn't just any demon. He was a fallen celestial whose power ran through her veins like liquid starlight. Every cut, every bruise they inflicted only awakened something ancient and terrible within her. As they shoved her off the cliff's edge, expecting the rocks to claim another impure soul, powerful arms caught her mid-fall. Captain Darius Blackwater, scourge of 7 seas, pulled her against his chest with eyes that burned like emeralds. "Foolish mortals," he growled, his ship's black sails billowing behind them. "They throw away the most valuable treasure in the realm." But why would the most feared pirate captain risk everything to save a condemned half-blood? And what did he know about her true heritage that even she didn't understand? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sera's consciousness flickered between waking and dreaming as Captain Blackwater carried her aboard his ship. The wooden deck felt solid beneath her feet when he finally set her down, a stark contrast to the endless fall she'd expected to be her last sensation. Salt spray kissed her face as the vessel cut through the waves, putting distance between them and the island that had condemned her to die. "Easy there," Darius murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. His hands remained steady on her shoulders, and she realized she was trembling, not from cold, but from the aftershock of nearly meeting her death. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue when she tried to speak it. She'd never been safe, not since the day her mixed heritage had become apparent. The villagers of Valdris had tolerated her presence for 18 years, but when the blight struck their crops and their livestock began dying, they needed someone to blame. A half-blood was the perfect scapegoat. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse from screaming as they dragged her through the village. "Why save me?" Darius studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. His weathered features spoke of countless battles fought and won, but his eyes held an ancient knowledge that seemed at odds with his mortal appearance. "Because I know what you are, Sera Nightfall, and what you could become." Her surname sent a chill down her spine. She'd never told him her name, had never seen him before in her life, yet he spoke it with a familiarity that suggested he'd known of her existence long before today. "How do you—" "Your father," he interrupted, turning to gaze out at the horizon where storm clouds gathered. "Azrael the Fallen, last of the starbound before his banishment from the celestial realm." The world tilted beneath her feet. She'd grown up knowing her father was different, dangerous, but her mother had died when she was young, taking most of his secrets with her. The villagers had whispered about demons and dark magic, but they'd never spoken of celestials or falling stars. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Celestials are myths, stories told to children." Darius laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Look around you, girl. My ship sails through waters that should have claimed her a dozen times over. My crew consists of men who died in battle centuries past. Magic is the only thing keeping this vessel, and all of us aboard her, bound to this realm." He turned back to her, and in the fading light his eyes seemed to glow. "Your blood calls to power the way a beacon calls to ships in the night. I felt it from leagues away." As if responding to his words, warmth spread through her veins. The cuts on her palms began to close, silver light threading through her skin like delicate embroidery. She watched in fascination and terror as her wounds healed themselves, leaving only faint scars that pulsed within a radiance. "The awakening has begun," Darius observed, his voice tinged with something between reverence and hunger. "Your human blood has kept the celestial side dormant, but trauma has a way of breaking down barriers. Those fools on the island may have just unleashed something far more powerful than they could imagine." "I don't understand any of this," Sera said, wrapping her arms around herself as the silver light faded back beneath her skin. "I just want to go home." The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. There was no going back to the life she'd known. The taste of salt and copper lingered on Lyra's tongue as consciousness slowly returned. Her head throbbed with each heartbeat, and when she tried to move, rough rope bit into her wrists. The world swayed beneath her, not the familiar sway of her family's fishing boat, but something larger, more powerful. She forced her eyes open to find herself in the belly of a ship, surrounded by wooden crates and barrels that creaked with each roll of the vessel. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the planking above, casting dancing patterns across her bound hands. The air reeked of tar, brine, and something else, something metallic that made her stomach lurch. So the little bird finally wakes. The voice came from the shadows, smooth as aged whiskey, but with an edge that could cut glass. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Lyra's breath caught. The man before her was nothing like the grizzled pirates from her grandmother's stories. Tall and lean, he moved with a predator's grace, his dark hair tied back to reveal a face that belonged more in a noble's portrait than on a wanted poster. Only the wicked curve of his smile and the cutlass at his hip marked him for what he was. "Captain Kyle Blackwater," she whispered, the name bitter on her tongue. Every child in the coastal villages knew that name, whispered it like a prayer or a curse depending on their circumstances. "My reputation precedes me." He crouched before her, close enough that she could see the strange silver flecks in his dark eyes. "Though I confess, I know nothing of you beyond the rather impressive price on your head." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" His gaze swept over her face with unsettling intensity. The posting was quite specific. Young woman, 17 years of age, dark hair, violet eyes. His voice caught slightly on the last detail, and something shifted in his expression. Eyes that mark her as cursed blood, wanted dead by order of the Purity Council. The words hit her like a physical blow. The Purity Council, the religious zealots who had gained power in the capital, preaching that mixed heritage was an abomination that weakened the realm. She had heard the rumors of their growing influence, their lists of undesirables, but never imagined. "You're lying." But even as she said it, fragments of memory crashed over her. The stranger in the marketplace who had stared too long at her face, her mother's increasingly frantic warnings to stay close to home, the way her father had begun sleeping with his sword beside the bed. Kyle reached into his coat and withdrew a rolled parchment, unfurling it before her eyes. Her own face stared back, rendered in careful detail, with text beneath promising a substantial reward for her death. The sight of it, the proof of her doom written in official script, made her vision blur with tears she refused to shed. "The question," Kyle continued, rolling the poster back up, "is what makes one little village girl worth so much gold to the council?" She said nothing, though her mind raced. Her mother had always been secretive about her own past, deflecting questions with sad smiles and subject changes. But there had been hints, the way she sometimes spoke of the capital as if she knew it well, the expensive jewelry hidden in the false bottom of her chest, the manner in which she carried herself when she thought no one was watching. "Perhaps," Kyle mused, "it has something to do with why your eyes aren't quite right for a fisherman's daughter." Lyra's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I've sailed many seas, little bird, and I've learned to recognize the bloodlines that matter. That particular shade of violet." He tilted his head, studying her with unnerving focus. "I've seen it before, in portraits hanging in royal galleries." The implication hit her like a rogue wave. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Kyle rose to his feet, beginning to pace in the confined space. "A noble lady disappears from court 20 years ago, presumed dead. She surfaces in a fishing village with a new name and a fisherman husband. Years later, their daughter bears the unmistakable eyes of the Astoria bloodline." Lyra's world tilted, and not from the ship's movement. Astoria. The royal family name felt foreign on her tongue. yet somehow familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby. The Purity Council would certainly consider royal bastard blood worth hunting, Kyle observed, especially if certain parties learned of your existence and decided you might be useful to their own ambitions. Why are you telling me this? She demanded. Why haven't you killed me for the bounty? The salt spray stung Kira's face as she gripped the ship's railing, watching the imperial city shrink into a grey smudge on the horizon. 3 days had passed since Captain Thorne had claimed her as his prize, and still she couldn't decide if she'd been saved or simply traded one doom for another, having second thoughts. She turned to find Thorne approaching, his dark coat billowing in the wind. Without the dramatic shadows of the execution platform, she could see him more clearly, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a handful of years older than herself, with sharp green eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they looked upon. Would it matter if I were? She asked. No, he said simply, coming to stand beside her at the rail. But I'm curious what troubles you more, leaving behind everything you've known, or discovering you're worth more alive than dead. Kira studied his profile. Why did you really take me? The truth, not whatever performance you gave those nobles. Thorne was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of blue water. Tell me, what do you know of the old bloodlines, the ones that existed before the Empire consolidated power? Only what everyone knows. They were wiped out in the Purge 2 centuries ago, too dangerous to let survive. Not wiped out, Thorne said softly, hidden, scattered, bred into obscurity until their gifts became so diluted that most never even manifest. He turned those piercing eyes on her. But sometimes, rarely, the old power surfaces true and strong. A chill ran down Kira's spine that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. What are you saying? I'm saying that mark on your shoulder isn't just a sign of mixed blood. It's a birthmark that appears only in those who carry the bloodline of the Stormcallers. Kira stepped back from him, shaking her head. That's impossible. The Stormcallers were myth even before the Purge, weather workers who could command wind and wave, Thorne finished, who could speak to the sea itself and have it answer. Myth, he gestured to the churning waters around them. Look at the sky, Kira. Tell me what you see. Against her will, she looked up. The sky had been clear when they'd left port, but now dark clouds were gathering with unnatural speed, spiraling in patterns that made her dizzy to follow. More disturbing still was the way the sight made something deep in her chest respond, a warmth that pulsed in rhythm with the rolling thunder. Stop it, she whispered. I'm not doing anything, Thorne said. This is you, reacting to emotional stress. It's been building since we left port. I can feel it in the wind patterns, see it in the way the waves have been growing rougher, despite the lack of any natural storm systems. The warmth in her chest flared hotter, and the wind suddenly gusted with enough force to snap several ropes. Sailors shouted across the deck as they scrambled to secure loose rigging. Control it, Thorne commanded, his voice cutting through her panic. Take a deep breath and pull it back in. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You've been doing it your whole life without realizing it. Every time you got angry or frightened and then forced yourself to be calm, you were learning control. Kira closed her eyes and tried to find that familiar place of stillness she'd always retreated to when the world became too cruel to bear. Slowly, gradually, the warmth in her chest began to settle and she felt the wind ease around them. When she opened her eyes, Thorne was watching her with something that might have been approval. Better. With proper training, you could learn to harness that power instead of just suppressing it. And you can provide this training? I can provide teachers. There are others like you, Kira. Survivors of bloodlines the Empire thought it had eliminated. We've built something of a sanctuary for those who don't fit into the neat categories the nobles prefer. The ship lurched slightly as they caught a crosswind, and Kira found herself thinking of her small room in the servants' quarters, of the other half-bloods who'd shared her fate of invisibility. None of them would mourn her disappearance. They couldn't afford to care too deeply about anyone the Empire might decide to dispose of. What do you want in return, she asked. For this sanctuary, this training. Nothing comes without a price. Thorn's smile was sharp as a blade. Smart girl. You're right. I want something from you. Your power, once you've learned to use it properly. The Empire has ruled the seas too long, Kira. They've made the ocean into their highway, their source of wealth and conquest. But the sea remembers the old powers, the old agreements. With a true storm core at my side, he didn't need to finish. She could see the hunger in his eyes, the ambition that burned as fiercely as any storm. Kira looked out at the endless water and felt that strange warmth pulse again in response to the waves. Perhaps being saved and being doomed weren't mutually exclusive after all. The sea spray stung Lyra's face as she gripped the ship's railing, watching the coastline of her homeland shrink into a grey smudge on the horizon. 3 days had passed since Captain Thorn had pulled her from the executioner's platform, and she still couldn't quite believe she was alive. The Crimson Revenge cut through the waves with predatory grace, its black sails snapping in the wind like the wings of some great hunting bird. Having second thoughts? Thorn's voice came from behind her, low and amused. She didn't turn around. About which part? Fleeing my homeland, joining a crew of pirates, or trusting a man whose reputation includes burning half the Imperial fleet? Only half. He moved to stand beside her at the rail, close enough that she caught his scent, salt air, leather, and something darker she couldn't name. My reputation has clearly suffered. Despite everything, Lyra found herself fighting a smile. Why did you save me? It was the question that had tormented her for 3 sleepless nights. She'd asked it before, but he'd deflected with jokes or changed the subject entirely. This time, when she looked at him, his expression was serious. Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something you can't control. His fingers drummed against the wooden rail. And because your blood isn't a curse, it's a weapon they're terrified of. You keep saying that, but you won't tell me what you mean. Thorn was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning the endless blue ahead. Tell me what you know about the Sundering. The Sundering, every child learned about it in their earliest lessons. The war that split the realm 300 years ago, when the pure bloodlines fought against the mixed breeds and won. That's the story they tell, yes. His voice carried an edge of bitterness. But winners write history, don't they? What if I told you the mixed breeds didn't lose because they were weak? What if they lost because they were betrayed? Lyra's heart began to race. What are you talking about? Your grandmother was Elara Nightwhisper, wasn't she? Daughter of a storm witch and a fire lord. The breath left Lyra's lungs. Her grandmother's name was forbidden, had been forbidden since her mother was a child. How do you know that name? Because my grandfather sailed with her. Thorn turned to face her fully now, and she saw something fierce burning in his eyes. She wasn't just some mixed-blood refugee, Lyra. She was the Storm Heir, the one prophesied to unite the scattered bloodlines and break the pure blood stranglehold on power. That's impossible. But even as she said it, memories flickered through her mind. Her mother's strange reluctance to discuss their ancestry, the way she'd always hushed Lyra when storms came, and the child laughed with delight at the lightning, the peculiar warmth that spread through her veins when she was angry. Is it? Thorn reached out, his fingers hovering just above her hand on the rail. When you're furious, does the air around you heat up? Do storms seem drawn to wherever you are? She snatched her hand back, but not before she felt the electric jolt that seemed to pass between them whenever they touched. Even if any of this were true, my grandmother is dead. The pure blood saw to that. Dead, yes, but her power didn't die with her. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It passed down through your mother, and now to you. That's why they wanted you dead before you came into your full strength. That's why they killed your mother when you started showing signs. The world tilted around her. You're saying they murdered her, but she died of fever. Bloodbane fever. Very rare, very specific. Thorn's jaw tightened. It only affects those with storm-touched heritage, and only when administered in precise doses. Lyra's knees buckled. She would have fallen if Thorn hadn't caught her arm, steadying her against the rail. The contact sent another jolt through her, stronger this time, and she saw him wince as if he'd felt it too. Because, he said softly, his thumb brushing against her wrist, where her pulse hammered frantically. You've already started to feel it, haven't you? The power stirring in your blood. It's why you survived the execution platform. Your body was beginning to fight back. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The strange energy that had been building inside her for months, the way metal seemed to hum when she touched it, the dreams full of lightning and wind and a woman's voice calling her name. It all suddenly made terrible sense. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Thorn's smile was sharp as a blade, but his eyes held something that might have been tenderness. "I want to help you become what they're so afraid of. I want to watch you burn their world down." The storm had passed, leaving the crimson revenge cutting through waters that gleamed like polished obsidian under the dawn's sky. Lyra stood at the bow, salt spray misting her face as she watched the horizon swallow the last traces of the Valorian coastline. 3 days had passed since Captain Thorn's crew had plucked her from certain death, and still she felt like she was drowning. "You're up early." His voice carried over the wind, rich with that familiar roughness that made her pulse quicken despite everything. She didn't turn around. "I couldn't sleep. The hammock too rough for noble blood?" There was teasing in his tone, but she heard something else underneath, a careful probing. "I'm not noble." The words came out sharper than intended. "We both know that's the problem." Thorn moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and sea salt on his skin. "Is it? A problem, I mean." Now she did look at him, searching those storm-grey eyes for mockery or pity. She found neither. "You don't understand what I am? Then enlighten me." The simple request hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Around them, the crew went about their morning duties with practiced efficiency, but Lyra felt utterly isolated in this moment of choice. How could she explain what she barely understood herself? "My mother was Valorian," she began slowly. "Minor nobility but pure bloodline. She was supposed to marry Lord Garrett's eldest son, secure an alliance between houses." Her fingers tightened on the ship's rail. Instead, she fell in love with someone else. "Let me guess, not another noble." A bitter laugh escaped her. "A traveling merchant from the eastern reaches. Except he wasn't just any merchant." She paused, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed. He was Drakmori. The change in Thorn was immediate. His casual stance straightened, and she caught the sharp intake of his breath. Even among pirates, the Drakmori were legend, a race thought extinct for 300 years, their very name synonymous with dark magic and forbidden power. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "The Drakmori were wiped out during the Purification Wars." "Not all of them." Lyra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Some survived, scattered, hiding among other races. My father was one of them." She touched the pendant at her throat, a small silver piece carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the morning light. "This was his, the only thing I have left of him besides my cursed blood." Thorn's gaze fixed on the pendant with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "What happened to him?" "The blood hunters found him when I was 12. They said his kind of magic was an abomination, that anyone carrying Drakmori blood was a threat to the natural order. The words tasted like ash. They burned him alive in the town square while the crowd cheered. And your mother? Died of grief within the year. Or shame. I was never sure which." Lyra finally turned to face him fully, lifting her chin with desperate defiance. "So now you know I'm half-blood, tainted, an affront to everything your kind holds sacred. The only question is whether you'll sell me to the blood hunters yourself or just throw me overboard." For a long moment, Thorn said nothing. The ship creaked around them, wind filling the sails as they sailed toward whatever destiny awaited. When he finally spoke, his words were not what she expected. "Show me." "What?" "Your power. You have it, don't you?" "Drakmori magic doesn't just die because someone wishes it would." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're lying." His voice was gentle but implacable. "I've seen the way shadows bend around you when you're upset, the way the temperature drops when you're afraid. You're holding something back, and it's eating you alive." She stared at him, this pirate captain who should be her enemy, who had every reason to see her as nothing more than a profitable commodity. Instead, he was looking at her like she was something precious and dangerous and worth protecting. "It's not safe," she whispered. "Neither is sailing with pirates, but here we are." Before she could lose her nerve, Lyra closed her eyes and reached for the power she'd spent years suppressing. It rose like a tide of midnight, cold and electric in her veins. When she opened her palm, shadows pooled there like liquid starlight, swirling with their own dark luminescence. The temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the ship's rigging, and several crew members called out in alarm. But Thorn never looked away from her face. "Magnificent," he breathed. The wonder in his voice shattered something inside her chest. The shadows scattered like startled birds, and warmth flooded back into the world. "Now," he said, stepping closer, "let's talk about what that blood really means." The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck as Kira emerged from the captain's quarters, still wearing the borrowed shirt that hung loose around her frame. The crew had already begun their daily routines, and she noticed how their conversations died to whispers when they spotted her. She couldn't blame them. She was an unknown quantity aboard their ship, a stowaway who had somehow earned their captain's protection. Thane stood near the wheel, studying a weathered map with his first mate, a grizzled man named Corvin, whose arms bore intricate tattoos that seemed to shift in the morning light. When Thane looked up and caught her eye, something flickered in his expression, a warmth that made her pulse quicken despite her best efforts to remain guarded. "Sleep well?" he asked as she approached, rolling up the map with practiced ease. "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, though the truth was more complicated. Her dreams had been filled with images of golden eyes and strong hands, of a voice that promised safety in a world that had shown her none. Corvin excused himself with a knowing look that made Kira's cheeks burn. She was beginning to suspect that nothing escaped the notice of Thane's crew, least of all the strange tension that seemed to crackle between her and their captain. "We'll reach Port Salis by evening," Thane said, his voice carefully neutral. "It's not the most civilized place, but it's far from Valdris influence. You'll be safe there while you decide what comes next." The words hit her like a physical blow. Safe but alone. Free but abandoned. She had known this arrangement was temporary, but hearing it spoken aloud made her chest tighten with something dangerously close to panic. "Of course," she managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm grateful for your help." Something in his expression shifted, and for a moment she thought he might say more. Instead, he turned his attention back to the horizon, jaw set in a hard line that suggested his own thoughts were far from peaceful. The day passed in a strange dance of proximity and distance. Kira found herself watching Thane as he moved about his ship, noting the easy confidence with which he commanded both vessel and crew. There was something magnetic about him, a pull that went beyond his obvious physical appeal. When he caught her staring, the heat in his gaze made her forget how to breathe. It was late afternoon when the attack came. The cry from the crow's nest shattered the lazy atmosphere like a sword through silk. Valdris ships, 3 of them, closing fast. Kira's blood turned to ice as she spotted the distinctive black sails on the horizon. They had found her. Somehow, impossibly, they had tracked her across the endless expanse of ocean. Thane appeared at her side as if summoned by her fear, his hand finding her shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "They're flying the banner of House Vex," Corvin called out, lowering his spyglass. "Royal hunters." The name sent a fresh wave of terror through Kira. House Vex served as the Valdris Emperor's personal executioners, tasked with hunting down those marked for death by the purity laws. They would not stop, would not be bought off or discouraged. They would pursue her to the ends of the earth if necessary. "They're not here for random piracy," Thane said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "They're here for you." It wasn't a question, and Kira found she couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. "Yes, what did you do?" "I was born," she whispered, the the words carrying the weight of 18 years of shame and fear. My mother was Valdris nobility, but my father— She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. My father was shadowkind. The mixing of bloodlines is forbidden, punishable by death. Understanding dawned in Thane's golden eyes, followed quickly by something fiercer, anger on her behalf that took her breath away. No one had ever been angry for her before. No one had ever looked at her heritage as an injustice rather than an abomination. "Captain," Corvin called urgently, "they'll be in cannon range within the hour." "Orders?" Thane's hand tightened on her shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "Thane, no," Kira protested, catching his arm as he turned away. "You don't understand. They'll kill everyone on this ship just for harboring me. Please, just put me in a boat. Let me face them alone." He stopped, turning back to face her with an expression that was equal parts tender and fierce. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin in a caress that made her knees weak. "I've spent my entire life taking what I want from this world," he said quietly. "And I want you safe." The words hung between them like a confession, loaded with implications that made her heart race, even as the sound of approaching death grew closer across the waves. The morning brought news that chilled Lyra to her very core. Captain Thorne stood at the bow of the ship, his face carved from stone as he read the message that had arrived by Carrier Hawk at dawn. The other crew members gave him a wide berth, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from their captain like heat from a forge. "What is it?" Lyra approached cautiously, her bare feet silent on the salt-stained deck. Thorne's jaw worked for a moment before he answered, his voice low and rough. "Your father has placed a bounty on your head. 10,000 gold pieces for your return, 20,000 for proof of your death." The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the ship's railing to steady herself, the wood rough beneath her palms. "He wants me dead more than alive." "It appears so." Thorne crushed the parchment in his fist. "The proclamation has been sent to every port from here to the Crimson Straits. Every bounty hunter, mercenary, and desperate fool with a sword will be looking for you." Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her cursed heritage pressing down like a millstone. The morning sun that had seemed so warm moments before now felt harsh against her skin. "Perhaps you should collect the bounty yourself. 20,000 gold would buy you a new ship, a better crew." The silence stretched so long that she finally opened her eyes to look at him. Thorne was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, his dark eyes intense beneath drawn brows. "Is that what you think of me?" His voice carried a dangerous edge. "That I'm the sort of man who would sell a woman to her death for coin?" "I don't know what sort of man you are," Lyra said quietly. "You're a pirate. You take what you want and answer to no one. Why should I be different?" In one fluid motion, Thorne stepped closer, backing her against the railing. His hands came up to grip the wood on either side of her, trapping her in the circle of his arms. This close, she could see the silver flecks in his eyes, could smell the salt and leather scent of him. "You want to know what sort of man I am?" His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried more weight than a shout. "I'm the sort who's spent 10 years hunting the bastards who destroyed my family. The sort who's killed men for looking at me wrong. The sort who takes what he wants without apology or regret." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She should have been afraid, trapped as she was, but instead she felt something else entirely, a dangerous thrill that made her pulse race. "But you," Thorne continued, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again, "are not something to be taken. You're not cargo to be sold or a prize to be claimed. You're—" He stopped abruptly, as if the words had surprised him as much as they surprised her. "What?" she breathed. "What am I?" For a heartbeat, she thought he might answer. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through to her soul. Then Finn's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Captain! Ship on the horizon!" Thorne stepped back so quickly that Lyra felt cold air rush in to fill the space where his warmth had been. He snatched the spyglass from his belt and trained it on the distant speck that had caught Finn's attention. "Flying the colors of House Valdris," he said grimly. "That's one of your father's ships." Lyra's heart sank. How did they find us so quickly? "Blood magic," Thorn said, snapping the spyglass closed. "They're tracking you somehow." He turned to shout orders to his crew. "All hands on deck, ready the cannons and prepare to come about." The ship erupted into controlled chaos as the pirates scrambled to their positions. Lyra stood frozen at the railing, watching the distant ship grow larger on the horizon. Her father's ship, come to drag her home to face judgment for the crime of her very existence. "Lyra." Thorn's hand touched her shoulder, warm and steady. "They won't take you. I give you my word." She turned to face him, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes. "Why? Why are you protecting me when it would be easier to let them have me?" "Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something beyond your control. And because—" He paused, his hand moving from her shoulder to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Because you're mine to protect now." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding across the deck and barking orders as his crew prepared for battle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck as Sera emerged from below, her legs still unsteady from another sleepless night. The dreams had grown more vivid, more demanding. Ancient voices whispered in languages she shouldn't understand, yet somehow did. Her fingertips tingled with an energy that made her nervous to touch anything important. "You look like death warmed over," Kyle observed from where he stood consulting charts near the wheel. His dark hair caught the golden light, and despite her exhaustion, Sera's pulse quickened at the sight of him. "Charming as always, Captain." She moved to the rail, grateful for the salt breeze that helped clear her head. "Where are we?" 2 days out from Siren's Rest. We should reach the archives by tomorrow evening." He rolled up the charts and approached her, his expression growing serious. The crew's getting restless about the dreams. Sera's stomach dropped. "They can hear them?" "Not here, exactly, but Finn says the ship feels different, like there's electricity in the air before a storm." Kyle leaned against the rail beside her, close enough that she caught his familiar scent of sea salt and leather. "Want to tell me what's really happening?" Before she could answer, a shout rang out from the crow's nest. "Ships on the horizon, 3 of them, flying Valdris colors." Kyle's hand immediately went to his sword hilt. "How long until they intercept us?" "At their current speed, maybe 2 hours," came the reply. The crew burst into action around them, but Sera barely noticed. The moment the lookout had mentioned Valdris ships, something had awakened inside her. The tingling in her hands intensified, and she could swear she felt the ocean itself responding to her presence. "We can outrun them," Kyle was saying to his first mate. "The Shadowhawk is faster than those heavy warships." "Not with the wind dying like this," the older man replied grimly. "We'll need to fight, 3 ships against 1. Even we're not that good." Sera closed her eyes, feeling the strange energy building within her. In her mind's eye, she could see the approaching vessels, could sense the hostile intent of their crews. More than that, she could feel the water between them, as if it were an extension of her own body. "There might be another way," she said quietly. Kyle turned to her, his green eyes sharp with concern. "Sera, whatever you're thinking, the archives in Siren's Rest. You said they might have answers about my heritage." She met his gaze steadily. "What if I already know what I am? What are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. "The old stories speak of storm callers, people who could command wind and wave. They were hunted to extinction centuries ago because the pure blood nobility feared their power." Kyle's face went very still. "That's just legend." "Is it?" Sera held up her hand, and tiny sparks of blue-white energy danced between her fingers. Several crew members backed away, muttering prayers. "I can feel the storm brewing beyond the horizon. I can sense the currents beneath us. And right now, I can feel those ships cutting through water that responds to my call. Sera," Kyle's voice held a warning. "Using power like that, if it even exists, could kill you. And if I don't, Those ships will kill all of us." She turned to face him fully, her heart breaking at the fear she saw in his eyes. Not fear of her, she realized, but fear for her. "I won't let them hurt you, any of you." Before he could stop her, she climbed onto the rail and dove. The water embraced her like coming home. The moment she submerged, the tingling sensation exploded into something magnificent and terrifying. Power coursed through her veins, and she felt her consciousness expand, touching every drop of seawater for miles around. She sensed Cale diving in after her, felt his panic as he searched the depths. But she was beyond his reach now, sinking deeper as she gathered the ocean's strength into herself. Schools of fish scattered from her path, and in the distance, whales sang warnings to their pods. The Valdris ships were closer now, close enough that she could feel their hulls displacing water with each surge forward. Their crews prepared weapons, anticipating an easy victory against a single pirate vessel. They had no idea what was coming. Sera opened her eyes in the blue-green depths and raised her hands. The ocean responded instantly, currents shifting at her command. She pulled power from the storm system miles away, drawing its winds and fury toward her location. Above, she sensed the first mate screaming orders to pull Kyle back aboard, felt the crew's terror as unnatural waves began building around their ship. The Shadow Hawk rose and fell with increasing violence, but Sera kept it protected within an eye of calm, even as she summoned a tempest. The real question was whether she would still be herself when it was over. The storm had passed, leaving the ship rocking gently in crystalline waters that reflected the dawn sky like polished glass. Sera stood at the bow, watching dolphins dance through the waves, their sleek forms cutting elegant arcs through the surface. For the first time since boarding the Crimson Tide, she felt something approaching peace. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Kyle's voice came from behind her, low and warm in the morning air. She didn't turn, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. "I've never seen them so close before. In Valdris, we only heard stories. The old sailors say dolphins are good luck, guardians of those who respect the sea." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of salt and leather that seemed to cling to him. "Though I've always thought they were simply free spirits, following their own course." Something in his tone made her glance at him. The harsh lines of command had softened in the golden light, revealing a man who looked younger than his reputation suggested. "Is that why you chose this life? For freedom?" His laugh held little humor. "Choice implies I had alternatives. Sometimes the sea chooses you instead." He studied her profile with those unsettling green eyes. "What about you, Sera? What would you choose if the world were different?" The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so long focused on mere survival that dreams seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. "I don't know. I used to think about traveling, seeing places beyond Valdris, learning about the old magic, the stories my grandmother told me before." She trailed off, unwilling to voice the memory of flames and screaming. "Before they killed her for teaching you," Kyle finished quietly. Sera's hands tightened on the rail. She'd never told him that detail, yet somehow he knew. "How did you?" "Because I recognized the look in your eyes, the weight of carrying knowledge that others would kill you for having." His voice dropped lower. "Tell me, what did she teach you about the binding of bloodlines?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She spun to face him, heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Sera. Not about this." His expression had grown intense, almost desperate. "The way you commanded the wind during the storm, that wasn't simple elemental magic. That was something far older, far more powerful. You're imagining things." "Am I? Then explain this." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a mark she'd never seen before, an intricate tattoo that seemed to shift and move in the light, depicting intertwined serpents around a crescent moon. "This is the mark of House Ravencrest, the royal bloodline that supposedly died out 50 years ago." Sera's world tilted. The mark was identical to one her grandmother had shown her in an ancient book, pressed between pages yellowed with age. "That's impossible." The Ravencrests were hunted to extinction. Most were, but not all. His eyes never left her face, just as not all of House Thornwick perished when the purges began. The name struck her like lightning. House Thornwick, the family her grandmother had whispered about in hushed tones, the bloodline that could supposedly bind the very elements to their will, the bloodline that made her an abomination in the eyes of those who feared what they couldn't control. "You know," she breathed. "I've known since the moment you stepped aboard my ship. The question is, do you understand what it means?" He moved closer, his voice urgent. "Our bloodlines weren't just noble houses, Sera. They were the last guardians of the ancient pacts, the ones who kept the balance between the mortal world and the realm of magic. When they fell, that balance began to crumble. The storms," she whispered, pieces clicking together. "The unnatural weather patterns, the way magic has become wild and unpredictable, it's all connected, and we might be the only ones left who can fix it." His hand found hers on the rail, warm and steady. "But it would require us to work together, to trust each other completely. And I know what I'm asking. You've spent your life hiding, and I'm suggesting you step into the light." Sera stared down at their joined hands, seeing the way her olive skin contrasted with his sun-bronzed fingers, two lost heirs to fallen houses, carrying the weight of a world's balance between them. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. "The binding ritual," she said slowly. "It requires both bloodlines, doesn't it? Thornwick and Ravencrest, united as they were in the old days." "It does. But Sera, you need to understand, if we do this, there's no going back. The kind of power we'd be wielding, the responsibility—" He squeezed her hand. "We'd be painting targets on our backs that would make your current bounty look like a minor inconvenience." She met his gaze, seeing her own resolution reflected there. "Then, I suppose it's fortunate I'm traveling with the most notorious pirate captain in these waters." His slow smile was answer enough. The morning mist clung to the ship's rigging like ghostly fingers as Lyra stood at the bow, watching the distant coastline emerge from the grey dawn. 3 weeks had passed since they'd fled Port Celestine, and the weight of her newfound knowledge pressed against her chest like a physical thing. The blood of the Shadowkin, the ancient race that could bend reality itself, flowed through her veins, marking her as either the most dangerous person alive or the key to salvation itself. Behind her, she could hear Kyle's boots on the deck, his familiar presence both comforting and terrifying. Since that night when he'd revealed what he knew about her heritage, something had shifted between them. The careful dance of attraction they'd maintained had become charged with an electricity that made the air itself seem to hum when they were near each other. "The sunken isles," Kyle said, coming to stand beside her. His shoulder brushed hers as he pointed toward the jagged silhouettes rising from the sea. "Legend says they were once mountain tops of the Shadowkin realm, before the purging sank their lands beneath the waves." Lyra's fingers tightened on the rail. "And you think we'll find answers there?" "I think we'll find what's left of your people," he said quietly. "The question is whether they'll see you as kin or threat." The crew moved around them with practiced efficiency, adjusting sails and checking weapons. Word had reached them 2 days ago that the High Council had placed a bounty on Lyra's head, enough gold to buy a small kingdom. Every port would be dangerous now, every stranger a potential enemy. "Captain," Marcus called from the helm, his weathered face grim. "Ship on the horizon. Flying council colors." Kyle's expression hardened as he lifted his spyglass. "Damnation! It's the Righteous Fury, Admiral Blackthorn's flagship." He lowered the glass, his jaw tight. "He's been hunting me for 5 years. This isn't coincidence." Lyra felt the familiar stirring in her blood, the shadow magic responding to her rising fear. Around her feet, the ship's shadows deepened unnaturally. "They found us." "Not us," Kyle said, his hand finding hers. "Me. Blackthorn doesn't know about you. This is personal between him and I." His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending warmth shooting up her arm. "But if they take this ship, they'll discover what you are. The crew erupted into controlled chaos as they prepared for battle. Cannons were loaded, weapons distributed, battle stations taken. But Lyra could see the truth in their faces. They were outgunned and outnumbered. "There's another way," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Kyle turned to her sharply. "No. Whatever you're thinking, no." "I can feel it, Kale. The power in my blood. It's stronger now since we left port. It's like being near the old lands is awakening something." She met his gaze, seeing her own fear reflected in his dark eyes. "I could sink that ship and reveal yourself to every spyglass and scrying glass in the fleet. The moment you use that kind of power, every mage in the realm will know what you are." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "I won't let you become the monster they say you are." The enemy ship was closing fast, her gun ports opening like dark mouths. Lyra could make out figures on the deck, the glint of armor and steel. In minutes, the battle would begin. "Then we run," she said suddenly. Kyle shook his head. "She's faster than us, and the wind's against us. We can't—" "Not the ship." Lyra turned toward the sunken isles, her heart pounding. "We take a boat, just us. Let your crew scatter. They can find safety in the archipelago. But you and I, we go to the ruins." For a moment, Kale stared at her in silence. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks. The practical pirate captain warring with something deeper, something that had grown between them in stolen moments and shared dangers. "You're asking me to abandon my ship, my crew. I'm asking you to trust me." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "The way I've learned to trust you." The first cannon shot boomed across the water, a warning shot that sent spray cascading over their bow. Time was running out. Kyle's eyes searched hers for one more heartbeat. Then he was shouting orders, calling for the longboat, instructing Marcus to take the crew to safety in the maze of smaller islands. The deck erupted in controlled chaos as his people who had followed him for years, prepared to watch their captain sail into legend and likely death. As they lowered the small boat into choppy waters, Lyra caught Kyle's hand. "If we don't come back—" "We will," he said fiercely, helping her over the rail. "Whatever's waiting in those ruins, whatever truth about your heritage we find there, we'll face it together." The longboat hit the water as the first real volley of cannon fire began, and they rowed hard toward the mist-shrouded mysteries of the sunken isles. The ancient tome felt heavier than it should have as Sera turned its yellowed pages, the weight of centuries pressing against her fingertips. Captain Darius stood beside her in the ship's cabin, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, yet the space between them seemed vast as an ocean. "Here," she whispered, pointing to a passage written in the old script. "It speaks of the confluence, when the bloodlines of sea and storm unite under the shadow moon." Darius leaned closer, his dark hair brushing her shoulder as he studied the text. The familiar scent of salt and leather enveloped her, but beneath it lurked something else, tension, sharp as a blade's edge. "What does it mean?" Sera's throat constricted. The words on the page seemed to burn themselves into her vision, their meaning as clear as it was terrifying. "It means my mother wasn't just any storm-touched. She was one of the Tempest Queens, the lost bloodline that could command both wind and water." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Outside, the crew's voices carried on the night air, oblivious to the revelation unfolding in their captain's quarters. Darius straightened slowly, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "And your father?" His voice was carefully controlled, but Sera caught the undercurrent of something else. Not quite fear, but a wariness that made her chest tighten. "Sea-born nobility, the Meridian line." She closed the book with trembling hands. "The text says their union was forbidden because together their children would possess power over the very fabric of the ocean realm itself." Darius moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit waves. His shoulders were rigid beneath his white shirt, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she'd learned meant he was thinking furiously. When he finally spoke, His words cut through her like ice. The Meridian line was wiped out 20 years ago. Every last member. Every last legitimate member, Sera corrected quietly. My father survived because he was already in exile, stripped of his name and titles for refusing an arranged marriage. The captain turned then, and the look in his eyes made her step backward. There was something wild there, something that reminded her why men feared him across 7 seas. Do you understand what you're telling me? His voice was low, dangerous. You're not just mixed blood, Sera. You're the heir to 2 of the most powerful maritime bloodlines ever to exist, the kind of power that toppled kingdoms and reshaped coastlines. She wanted to deny it, to laugh and say it was impossible, but the evidence was there, in the way the wind answered her call, in how the sea itself seemed to bend to her will when her emotions ran high. I never asked for this. Neither did I. The words escaped him like a confession, and suddenly she understood. The careful distance he'd been maintaining, the way he'd avoided being alone with her since their kiss, it wasn't about protecting her reputation or his own complicated feelings. He was afraid of her. You think I'm going to hurt you, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. You think I'm going to become some kind of monster? Darius crossed the space between them in 2 quick strides, his hands cupping her face before she could retreat. No, he said fiercely. I think you're going to save us all, and it's going to destroy you in the process. The raw emotion in his voice made her knees weak. She could see her reflection in his dark eyes, could feel the calluses on his palms against her cheeks. Then, help me find another way. There is no other way. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. The Pure Blood Council won't stop hunting you now that they know what you are. And if they can't capture you, they'll try to destroy you before your power fully manifests. When? 3 days, when the shadow moon reaches its peak. He dropped his hands, leaving her skin cold in their absence. That's when the confluence will be complete, and you'll either come into your full inheritance or die trying. She finished the sentence he couldn't, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity. The captain who'd saved her from drowning, who'd kissed her like she was precious beyond measure, was also the man who might have to watch her perish, attempting to claim a birthright she'd never wanted. Thunder rumbled overhead, though the sky had been clear moments before. The ship rocked gently as wind filled the sails without any crew to adjust them. Sera's emotions were affecting the weather again, responding to her distress with increasing intensity. I won't let fear decide my fate, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. If this power is truly mine, then I'll learn to master it. But I need to know. Will you still stand with me when the time comes? Darius smiled then, sharp and piratical and full of the reckless courage that had made him legend. Darling, I wouldn't miss it for all the treasure in the 7 seas. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally broke just as Kyle ship limped into the hidden cove. Rain lashed the deck in sheets, turning the world into a blur of grey and silver. Lyra pressed herself against the mainmast, watching through the downpour as her companions secured the vessel with practiced efficiency despite their exhaustion. 3 days had passed since their escape from the Meridian fleet, and the cost was written in every line of their faces. 2 crew members lay below deck, their wounds festering despite her best efforts to heal them. The ship itself bore scars from cannon fire, and their supplies were running dangerously low. This way, Kyle called over the howling wind, his hand finding hers with unerring accuracy in the chaos. There's shelter beyond those rocks. She followed him through the treacherous path carved into the cliff face, her sodden dress clinging to her legs and making each step a challenge. Behind them, the crew hauled essential supplies from the ship, their movements urgent but methodical. They'd done this before, found sanctuary in hidden places when the world turned against them. The cave they entered was larger than she'd expected, with smooth walls that spoke of careful shaping rather than natural formation. Phosphorescent moss provided an eerie blue-green glow, and somewhere in the depths she could hear the steady drip of fresh water. How did you know about this place? she asked as Kyle began gathering dried wood from a carefully maintained pile near the entrance. "Every captain worth his salt knows the hidden harbors," he replied, striking flint to tinder with steady hands. "Though this one holds more significance than most. This is where my father brought me after my mother died." The fire caught, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Lyra settled beside him on a ledge worn smooth by countless previous occupants, watching as the crew gradually filled the space with their supplies and bedrolls. The sound of their voices, subdued but alive, created a strange comfort in the enclosed space. "You never speak of your parents," she observed quietly. Kyle's hand stilled on the kindling. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began feeding larger pieces of wood to the growing flames. "My mother was born to nobility, second daughter of a duke with lands along the eastern coast. My father was a merchant captain who dealt in exotic goods from across the shattered seas. They fell in love at first sight, or so the story goes." His voice carried an old pain, carefully controlled. Her family disowned her when she chose him over an arranged marriage to another duke. They built a life together on the waves, and for a time they were happy. The fire crackled between them, and Lyra found herself holding her breath, sensing the weight of what was coming. "She died of fever when I was 14, something she picked up in the southern ports. The healers said it was already too far advanced when we reached them. My father, he tried to continue as before, but grief consumed him. He became reckless, took contracts he should have refused, trusted people he should have known better than to trust. What happened to him? Betrayed by his own first mate over a cargo of Valerian spices. Throat cut while he slept." Kyle's jaw tightened. "I was 16 when I took command of his ship and his crew. Those who had been loyal to him chose to follow me. The others, well, they learned what happened to traitors." Lyra reached out, her fingers covering his where they rested on his knee. His skin was warm despite the chill of the cave, and she felt the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Those experiences made me who I am. They taught me that loyalty must be earned, and that family isn't always blood." He turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together. "Sometimes it's the crew that stands with you when the world turns hostile. Sometimes it's the woman who chooses to trust you despite everything she's been told about pirates and their kind." The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them like the warmth of the fire. Around them, the crew had settled into quiet conversations or sleep, giving them a bubble of privacy in the shared space. "Kyle," she began, but he shook his head. "Whatever you're about to say about being a burden or bringing danger to us, don't. I've made my choice, Lyra. We've all made our choices. Your power, your bloodline, whatever destiny awaits you, we'll face it together." She studied his profile in the firelight, seeing not the notorious pirate captain the world feared, but a man who had loved and lost and chosen to love again despite the cost. The storm raged outside their shelter, but here, in this ancient sanctuary, she felt something she had never known before. She felt safe. She felt home. The ancient stone beneath Lyra's feet hummed with power as she descended deeper into the forgotten temple. Each step echoed through corridors that hadn't known footsteps for centuries, the sound swallowed by shadows that seemed to writhe and dance in the flickering light of her torch. Behind her, Kyle's presence was a steady anchor, his hand never far from his sword hilt, despite the reverent silence that surrounded them. "The air tastes different here," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the heavy stillness. "Like lightning before a storm." Kyle nodded, his weathered face grave in the torchlight. "Magic leaves its mark on a place. The older it is, the deeper it sinks into stone and bone." His eyes found hers, dark with concern. "Are you certain about this, lass? Once we wake what sleeps here, there'll be no going back." Lyra's fingers traced the pendant at her throat, the metal warm against her skin. The pull she'd felt for days had grown stronger with each step into the temple's depths, as if something deep within the earth called to the very core of her being. "I've been running from what I am my entire life, It's time I learned the truth." They emerged into a vast circular chamber, its domed ceiling lost in shadow despite their torch. Ancient symbols covered every surface, carved deep into black stone that gleamed like obsidian. At the chamber's heart stood a pool of water so still it might have been polished glass, reflecting their torchlight like captured stars. By the depths, Kyle breathed, his voice filled with awe. "I've seen treasures from every corner of the world, but this—" He shook his head, unable to finish. Lyra barely heard him. The moment she'd entered the chamber, the pendant had begun to glow with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and flow, rearranging themselves into patterns that tugged at memories she'd never known she possessed. "It's a memory pool," she said, the knowledge flowing through her like water through parched earth. The Celestials used them to preserve their most precious secrets. She moved toward the pool as if in a dream, each step feeling both foreign and familiar. "My mother. She brought me here once, when I was too young to remember, but part of me knows this place." Kyle's hand caught her arm gently. "The crew will be wondering where we've gone, and if the purifiers discover this place—" "They won't." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "The temple chooses who can find it, just as it chose to reveal itself to us now." She turned to face him, seeing her own fears reflected in his storm-grey eyes. "Will you trust me?" His calloused fingers brushed her cheek with infinite tenderness. "With my life, my heart, and my ship, always." The simple words sent warmth flooding through her chest, steadying her resolve. She knelt beside the pool, her reflection wavering in its depths. The pendant's glow intensified, casting dancing patterns on the chamber walls that seemed to tell a story in languages older than kingdoms. "The blood of two worlds flows in your veins," a voice whispered from the water, "neither male nor female, but something beyond such mortal distinctions. Child of earth and sky, shadow and light. Long have we waited for your return." Lyra's breath caught as the pool's surface began to shimmer and swirl. Images formed in its depths. A woman with Lyra's own dark hair standing on a balcony overlooking clouds, her ethereal beauty marking her as celestial. But beside her stood a man whose feet were planted firmly on earthly soil, his eyes warm with the love that would doom them both. "Your parents defied the laws of both realms for love," the voice continued. "Their union was forbidden because they knew what power it might create, what you might become." More images flowed through the water, battles fought between earth and sky, the Celestials retreating to their floating cities while magic slowly drained from the world below. And through it all, whispers of prophecy, of one who would bridge the gap between the two realms or destroy them both in the attempt. "The purifiers fear you because they sense what they cannot understand," the voice said as the images began to fade. "Your blood can heal the rift between worlds, restore the balance that was lost, but power always comes with choice." The pool fell still, its surface once again mirror-smooth. Lyra stared into its depths, seeing only her own face reflected back, but changed somehow, as if she were truly seeing herself for the first time. Kyle's hand found her shoulder, warm and real and grounding. "What did you see?" She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, but her heart strangely light. For the first time in her life, the weight of her mixed heritage felt less like a burden and more like possibility. "I saw why they want me dead," she said, turning to face the man who had given her the chance to discover this truth, "and why I can't let that happen." The ancient chamber, deep within the Meridian archives, pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made Lyra's mixed blood sing in her veins. Captain Blackwater's hand remained steady on her shoulder as they faced the Council of Bloodlines, but she could feel the tension radiating from his frame. The 7 hooded figures before them represented centuries of tyranny, their faces hidden behind masks of polished bone that gleamed in the ethereal light. "The Shadowborn returns," spoke the figure at the center, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "We had hoped the purges eliminated your tainted lineage permanently." Lyra stepped forward, surprising herself with her boldness. The weeks aboard Blackwater's ship had changed her, hardened her resolve in ways she was only beginning to understand. My lineage isn't tainted. Your records show the truth you've spent generations trying to bury. The council member's mask tilted slightly. What truth could a mongrel possibly know? From within her coat, Lyra withdrew the crystalline artifact they had recovered from the sunken palace. It blazed with silver fire in her palm, responding to her presence in ways that made several council members shift uncomfortably. The truth that the Shadowborn weren't destroyers. We were guardians. We were the ones who maintained the balance between the realms. Lies, another council member spat, but his voice wavered. Blackwater moved to stand beside Lyra, his own power emanating in dark waves that seemed to complement, rather than clash with her silver light. The evidence is overwhelming. The real question is why you've worked so hard to exterminate the very bloodline that could save this world from what's coming. As if summoned by his words, the chamber began to tremble. Through the massive windows that looked out into the deep ocean, tentacles of pure shadow pressed against the glass. The void spawn had found them, drawn by the convergence of power in this place. "You've doomed us all by bringing her here," the lead council member snarled, rising from his throne. The barriers were holding until... "The barriers were failing long before we arrived," Lyra interrupted, feeling knowledge flow through her as the artifact's power merged with her bloodline. "They've been weakening for decades because you destroyed the people who knew how to maintain them." The windows began to crack under the assault from outside. More creatures of living darkness pressed against the ancient glass, their alien hunger palpable even through the mystical protections of the archives. "Then fix it," another council member demanded. "If you truly are what you claim, restore the barriers." Lyra looked at the artifact in her hand, then at Blackwater. His dark eyes held complete faith in her, a trust that both terrified and empowered her. She had spent her life hiding what she was, suppressing the strange abilities that marked her as different. But here, in this moment, hiding was no longer an option. "I can't do it alone," she said quietly. The old ways required balance, shadow and light, order and chaos. She turned to face Blackwater fully. "I need you." He understood immediately. The connection between them had been growing stronger with each passing day, their opposing natures creating something greater than the sum of their parts. Without hesitation, he placed his hands over hers on the artifact. Power exploded through the chamber. Lyra's silver light intertwined with Blackwater's darkness, creating patterns of energy that seemed to repair reality itself. The ancient symbols carved into the walls blazed to life, responding to the combination of their bloodlines in ways the original architects had intended. But the ritual demanded more than just power. It demanded truth. As the magic flowed through them, Lyra saw flashes of the real history. The Shadowborn and the Voidwalkers, Blackwater's people, had once worked together to guard the boundaries between worlds. Their bloodlines had been deliberately kept separate after a betrayal that shattered the old alliances. "The Council," she gasped, understanding flooding through her. "They orchestrated the war between our peoples." The lead council member was backing toward a hidden exit, his mask fallen away to reveal a face that was neither fully human nor fully something else. "The old ways brought chaos. We brought order. You brought stagnation," Blackwater growled, his power surging. "And in doing so, you weakened every defense this world had." The barriers around the archive solidified, reinforced by the combined might of their bloodlines. The void spawn outside shrieked and withdrew, repelled by the renewed protections. But Lyra could sense this was only a temporary reprieve. "This is just the beginning," she said, looking at the remaining council members. "The real threats are still coming, and we'll need everyone. Shadowborn, Voidwalker, and yes, even the pure bloodlines, working together to stop them." The artifact's light began to fade, but she could feel its power had fundamentally changed her, awakened abilities she had never imagined. When she looked at Blackwater, she saw the same transformation in his eyes. They were no longer just pirate captain and refugee. They had become something new, something the world desperately needed. The question now was whether they could convince others to follow them into the storm that was coming. The ancient temple rose before them like a forgotten dream carved from moonstone and shadow. Sera's breath caught as they approached the towering entrance, its archway inscribed with symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The markings on her arms responded, growing warm beneath her sleeves, and she instinctively pressed closer to Kyle's side. "The temple of the first binding," Kyle murmured, his usual confidence tempered with reverence. "I've sailed past it a dozen times, but never thought to set foot inside." The crew had remained aboard the ship, anchored in the hidden cove below. Only Sera, Kyle and Mira had made the treacherous climb up the cliff face to reach this sacred place. The old woman who had guided them here, the keeper of ancient knowledge they sought for weeks, had vanished the moment they'd reached the temple grounds. "She said the answers you seek lie within," Mira whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the supernatural silence surrounding the temple. "But she also warned that knowledge comes with a price." Sera stepped forward, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the symbols along the walls blazed to life, casting dancing shadows that seemed to tell stories of ages past. Images flickered in the stone itself, battles between creatures of impossible beauty and terrible power, bloodlines intertwining like golden threads, and at the center of it all, figures that bore the same markings that now adorned her skin. The Valdris weren't just another magical bloodline, she breathed, understanding flooding through her as the temple's memories washed over her consciousness. They were the bridge between worlds. Kyle moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers as they watched the stone visions unfold. Warriors with her silver hair and golden eyes stood at gateways between realms, holding back creatures of nightmare while allowing passages of wonder. They were guardians, protectors, the living keys to doorways that connected their world to countless others. "That's why your blood is so feared," Mira said softly, "and why it's so precious. You don't just carry magic, Sera. You carry the power to open paths between worlds." The implications hit like a physical blow. Every faction hunting her, every noble house seeking her death or capture, they all sensed what she represented without truly understanding it. In the wrong hands, her power could unleash horrors beyond imagination, but in the right ones, "The barriers are weakening," Sera whispered, the temple's ancient knowledge flowing through her like a tide. "That's why my powers have been growing stronger. The boundaries between worlds are beginning to fray, and my bloodline is responding, trying to restore the balance." A low rumble echoed from somewhere deep within the temple, and dust rained from the ceiling. Kyle's grip on her hand tightened as they exchanged worried glances. "We're not alone," he said, his free hand moving to his sword hilt. The sound of marching feet echoed from the temple entrance. Through the archway, Sera could see torchlight flickering against the outer walls. Her heart sank as she recognized the crimson banners. The Royal Inquisition had found them. "There must be another way out," Mira urged, scanning the chamber frantically. But Sera stood transfixed, staring at the final vision playing out in the stone walls. A woman who looked exactly like her stood at the temple's heart, her hands pressed against a crystalline altar as she made a choice that would echo through generations. She could see the woman's lips moving, speaking words of binding and sacrifice. She sealed the pathways, Sera realized with growing horror. The last of the Valdris bloodline, my ancestor, she closed all the doorways to protect the world from an invasion of shadow creatures. But the seals were only meant to be temporary. "How temporary?" Kyle demanded, though his expression suggested he already dreaded the answer. The rumbling intensified, and cracks appeared in the temple walls. Outside, she could hear Commander Thorne's voice shouting orders to his men. Time was running out in more ways than one. "The barriers will fail within days," Sera said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "When they do, everything that was held back will come flooding through, unless—" She looked at the altar, its crystal surface now glowing with an urgent light that matched the markings on her skin. The choice her ancestor had made was the same one she now faced: sacrifice everything to maintain the barriers or risk the consequences of letting them fall. Kyle stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the altar. "There has to be another way. I won't let you throw your life away for a world that's done nothing but try to destroy you. Even if that world includes everyone you've sworn to protect?" she asked gently. "Your crew, the innocent people in every port we've visited?" The temple shuddered again as the Inquisition forces breached the outer chambers. Whatever choice she made, it had to be now. The ancient chamber thrummed with power that made Lyra's bones ache. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls like frozen lightning, each one pulsing with the same ethereal light that now coursed through her veins. The air itself seemed thick with magic, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. "This is it," Captain Thorne whispered, his voice barely audible above the chamber's otherworldly hum. "The nexus of convergence." Lyra stepped forward, drawn by an irresistible pull toward the center of the room where a pool of liquid starlight rippled without wind or touch. The surface showed no reflection, only swirling depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. This was what her bloodline had been created to find, what generations had died protecting the secret of its location. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels they'd descended. Lord Vex had found them, just as she'd known he would. The confrontation she'd been running from her entire life was finally at hand. "How long do we have?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Thorne's hand found hers, warm and steady despite the tremor she felt in his fingers. "Long enough for you to do what you came here to do." She turned to study his face, memorizing the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark eyes held both fierce determination and something softer, something that made her heart clench with equal parts joy and sorrow. In the crystalline light, he looked almost ethereal himself, as if he might dissolve into stardust at any moment. "You know what this means," she said. "If I claim my heritage, if I become what my bloodline was meant to be, you'll be the most powerful being in 7 realms," he finished. "I know." The footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by the harsh voices of Vex's soldiers. Lyra could hear the Lord's cultured tones cutting through the chaos, directing his men with cold efficiency. They had perhaps minutes before the chamber would be overrun. "And you know what that makes us," she continued, her voice catching on the words, "what it makes this between us." Thorne's grip on her hand tightened. "A pirate captain and a goddess? I've faced worse odds." Despite everything, she almost smiled. Even now, with the weight of destiny crushing down around them, he could make her believe that love might be enough to overcome the laws of nature itself. The pool's surface began to churn more violently, responding to her proximity and the awakening power in her blood. Images flickered in its depths, flashes of possible futures, potential paths stretching out like branches of an infinite tree. In some, she saw herself crowned in starlight, ruling over realms of endless possibility. In others, she witnessed the destruction that unchecked power could bring. And in a precious few, she glimpsed a future where she and Thorne stood together against whatever storms might come. "There's another choice," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I could break the cycle, shatter the bloodline magic instead of claiming it. The nexus would be destroyed, but so would the power that makes me a target." Thorne's expression grew fierce. "And condemn yourself to mortality? To a normal human lifespan when you were meant for eternity? 80 years with you," she said, stepping closer to him. "Or endless centuries alone? Which sounds like the greater treasure." The first soldiers appeared at the chamber's entrance, their armor clanking as they spread out to secure the exits. Lord Vex followed moments later, his pale eyes immediately fixing on Lyra with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Lady Lyra," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. "How wonderful to find you at last in your ancestral home. I trust you appreciate the irony. seeking to claim power in the very place where your mongrel bloodline was first created. She ignored him, focusing instead on the choice before her. The pool's surface had grown mirror-smooth, waiting for her decision. One touch would begin the transformation that would make her a goddess. One different touch, channeling her power in the opposite direction, would destroy everything and set her free. "Whatever you choose," Thorn murmured in her ear, "I'm with you. Goddess or mortal, queen or refugee, you're mine, and I'm yours." Lord Vex began walking toward them, his soldiers fanning out to cut off any escape routes. "The bloodline magic belongs to the pure races," he declared. "Your bastard heritage has no claim to such power." Lyra looked one last time at Thorn, drinking in the absolute certainty in his eyes. Then she knelt beside the pool and placed her hands on its edge, feeling the magic sing in recognition of her touch. The chamber filled with blinding light as her choice set the future in motion. The ancient chamber trembled as Lyra's bloodline awakened fully, silver light cascading from her skin like starfall. The Council of Purity pressed back against the walls, their faces masks of terror and fury, as the very foundations of their beliefs crumbled before their eyes. "Impossible," Lord Varian whispered, his blade still dripping with Kyle's blood. "The Starborn line died out centuries ago." "Did it?" Lyra's voice carried harmonics that hadn't been heard in this world for generations. The mixed blood they'd tried to purge was revealing itself as something far more powerful than any pure bloodline. Or did you simply drive it into hiding, force it to dilute itself for survival? Kyle struggled to his feet, pressing a hand to his wounded side. Despite the pain etched across his features, his eyes blazed with fierce pride as he watched her transformation. "That's my girl," he breathed. The silver radiance intensified, and Lyra felt the knowledge of her ancestors flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. She understood now why her mother had fled, why she'd chosen exile over execution. The Starborn hadn't been conquered. They'd made a strategic retreat, seeding their bloodline throughout the common population, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was theirs. "You built your empire on lies," Lyra said, advancing toward the cowering council. "Pure bloodlines, noble heritage, you're nothing but the descendants of usurpers who murdered the rightful rulers and rewrote history to justify your crimes." Lord Varian raised his sword with shaking hands. "Abomination! Even if you speak truth, we won't bow to mongrel royalty. Then you'll burn with the rest of your rotten foundation." Lyra lifted her hand, and silver fire erupted from her palm. But instead of striking down her enemies, the flames spread outward, seeking something else entirely. They flowed through the chamber's walls, following ancient pathways carved into the very stone. The council's citadel had been built upon the ruins of a Starborn palace, and the old magic still remembered its true masters. Throughout the city, people gasped as silver light began seeping from between the cobblestones, from the foundations of buildings, from the very air itself. The Starborn enchantments that had once protected this realm were reawakening, and with them came the truth. "Look around you," Lyra commanded. "Your precious pure-blood citizens carry traces of the old magic too. Every bloodline in this realm has been touched by Starborn heritage. Your ancestors made sure of that when they took our women as slaves and concubines. We've been hiding in plain sight for 300 years. The council members exchanged horrified glances as the implications sank in. If Starborn blood ran through every family line, then their entire social hierarchy was built on sand." Kyle moved to Lyra's side, his own dark magic rising to complement her silver radiance. Together, they were a force that could reshape the world. "What now, love?" he asked softly. "You could rule this realm, take back what's rightfully yours." For a moment, the offer tempted her. The power singing in her veins whispered of justice, of retribution, of a throne that had been stolen from her bloodline. She could feel the Starborn magic responding to every corner of the realm, ready to enforce her will. But then she thought of the villages Kyle had shown her during their travels, the common folk who suffered under the council's rigid caste system. They didn't need another tyrant, even a righteous one. They needed freedom. "No," she said finally. "I won't replace one broken system with another." She turned to face the assembled council, her voice ringing with authority that came from something deeper than bloodline or breeding. "The age of blood purity ends today. No more castes, no more persecution of mixed heritage. The realm will be governed by merit, not ancestry. You cannot simply overturn centuries of tradition," Lady Ashworth protested. "Watch me." Lyra's smile held all the dangerous promise of her pirate captain. "The starborn magic is already spreading, awakening in bloodlines that forgot their heritage. Soon every family will have to confront the truth of their mixed ancestry. Your pure blood nobility will find themselves outnumbered by the very people they've oppressed." Lord Varian made one last desperate lunge with his sword, but Kyle intercepted him, their blades ringing together. The pirate captain was wounded but far from defeated, and his opponent was no match for someone who'd survived years of actual combat rather than ceremonial duels. The sword went flying from Varian's grasp, and Kyle's blade found his throat. "That's enough dying for one day," Kyle said conversationally, "though I'm willing to make exceptions for anyone who threatens my lady." Lyra felt the transformation beginning to ebb, the silver light settling into a warm glow beneath her skin rather than the blazing radiance of awakening. She was herself again, but forever changed. The frightened girl who'd once begged for protection was gone, replaced by someone who could protect others. "It's done," she said quietly. The ancient chamber trembled as Lyra's mixed blood touched the crystalline heart of the sundering stone. Light erupted from the artifact, not the harsh glare she'd expected, but something warm and golden that seemed to recognize her very essence. The power coursed through her veins like liquid starlight, and for the first time in her life, she felt complete. "Impossible," breathed High Magistrate Thorn, his face ashen as he watched centuries of doctrine crumble before his eyes. "The stone rejects impure blood. It has always been a lie," Lyra finished, her voice carrying new authority. The truth blazed in her mind now, clear as crystal. The sundering wasn't meant to separate the bloodlines. It was meant to unite them. She turned to face the assembled crowd, nobles, pirates, and common folk alike, all united in their shock. "My mixed heritage isn't a curse. It's the key to healing what was broken long ago." Captain Darius stepped forward, his dark eyes fierce with pride and something deeper. "I knew there was something extraordinary about you from the moment I saw you in that alley, not because you needed saving, but because you were meant to save us all." The stone's light pulsed stronger, responding to Lyra's emotions. She could feel the ancient magic reaching out, seeking others of mixed blood throughout the kingdom. There were more like her, dozens, hundreds even, all hiding in shame when they should have been celebrated. The pure bloodlines had built their power on a foundation of lies, suppressing the very people who held the key to the realm's salvation. "Stop this madness!" Thorn drew his ceremonial blade, its enchanted steel gleaming. "I won't let a mongrel destroy everything we've built." He lunged toward Lyra, but Darius was faster. Steel rang against steel as the pirate captain intercepted the attack, his cutlass sparking against the magistrate's blade. Around them, chaos erupted as the noble guards clashed with Darius's crew, the chamber echoing with the sounds of battle. "The choice is yours, love," Darius called out between parries, his movements fluid and deadly. "You could leave with me right now. My ship's waiting and we could sail beyond their reach, live free on the open sea." The offer tempted her more than she cared to admit. A life of adventure with the man she'd come to love, far from the prejudice and politics of the mainland. But even as her heart yearned for that freedom, she felt the stone's power calling to her, reminding her of the greater purpose. "I can't," she whispered, then louder, her voice carrying across the chamber. "I can't run any more." Light blazed from the stone as Lyra embraced her destiny fully. The power flowed through her, and she felt her consciousness expand, touching the minds of every person in the chamber, noble and commoner, pirate and guard. She showed them all the truth hidden in the stone's ancient memory. Images flooded their minds, the kingdom before the sundering, when magic flowed freely and bloodlines mingled without shame. They saw the catastrophe that nearly destroyed everything, and how it was stopped not by pure blood, but by those who carried the strength of multiple lineages. The first rulers had rewritten history, claiming credit for salvation while banishing the true heroes. One by one, weapons clattered to the floor as the vision overwhelmed them. Even Thorn stumbled backward, his certainty cracking like ice in spring. "The mixed bloods are returning," Lyra declared, her voice resonating with power. "Hidden no longer. The realm faces new dangers. The sundering weakened more than just bloodlines. Ancient evils stir in the deep places, and only united can we stand against them." She turned to Darius, seeing the understanding in his eyes. He'd felt it too through their connection, the darkness gathering beyond the kingdom's borders, drawn by the scent of division and fear. "Your offer still stands?" she asked softly. His smile was answer enough. "Always. Though I suspect our sailing days just got more complicated. The most worthwhile adventures usually are." She gestured toward his crew, then at the stunned nobles. "Think they'll work together? For you? For the realm?" Darius sheathed his cutlass and extended his hand. "They'll learn to." As Lyra took his hand, the stone's light settled into a steady, warm glow. She could feel others of her kind responding across the kingdom, emerging from hiding, recognizing the call. There would be resistance, fear, those who clung to old prejudices, but change had begun. "Ready for the real adventure to start?" Darius murmured against her ear. Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of destiny and the lightness of love balanced perfectly within her. "With you? I'm ready for anything." The stone pulsed once more, sealing their bond and blessing the new age dawning. In the harbor beyond, a crimson dawn waited to carry them toward an uncertain but hopeful future, while in the chamber behind them, the first tentative steps toward unity began.